It is my great pleasure now to introduce to you the first keynote speaker we have, and that speaker is Dr. Tine Buffel. Tine is a fellow of the Academy of Social Sciences and a professor of sociology and social gerontology at the University of Manchester. Thank you for coming across the big pond to present today. She is the founding director of the Manchester Urban Aging Research Group. She's published widely in the field of aging, addressing social and environmental issues affecting aging populations, with particular focus on inequality, exclusion, and spatial and social justice. Renowned for her participatory and co-production methodologies, she collaborates with older people, local authorities, community groups, organizations, and so forth to study and develop age-friendly communities. Today, Tine is speaking on reimagining age-friendly communities, urban aging, and spatial justice. I bring you Tine.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm really delighted to be here. I must admit, it's always been a dream of mine to come to Vancouver, and the city really hasn't disappointed so far. On the contrary, I'm really enjoying my stay. And it's such a pleasure to be here today with you at this conference. Thank you, everyone, for making this happen. And my presentation today is going to focus on reimagining age-friendly communities, urban aging, and spatial justice. And this is what I am going to cover. So I will say a little bit about where I'm from and the group I lead. I will then go on to talk a little bit about the background on aging well in the right place and developing age-friendly cities and communities. Some contributions and challenges related to this age-friendly approach. And then I will introduce the idea of spatial justice to age-friendly cities and communities, and end with some key principles, questions, and examples from work in Manchester and beyond. And of course, any discussion on a concept like spatial justice must begin by acknowledging that we are on unceded traditional territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh people. I hope my pronunciation was okay. So I would like to acknowledge that first. And then I would like to say a little note about where I'm from. And I'm actually originally from Bruges in Belgium, but I would be considered an adopted Mancunian at the moment because I've moved to Manchester around 12 years ago, and part of the reason for that was because Manchester has this very strong commitment and tradition of working collaboratively around the idea of creating age-friendly cities and communities. And this very much comes from a social justice perspective, which links to the history of Manchester. And that was one of the reasons why I moved to Manchester, to really do more research into the field of aging, place, inequality, and age-friendly cities. Now, just a little bit about Manchester. How many people here, if you hear Manchester, think about football as the first? Well, there's so much more to Manchester, and I really invite you to come and see it for yourself. It is a really vibrant, a very ethnically diverse city with a very rich history. It's known as the first city in the world to be an industrial city, and it's got a very rich kind of history in terms of textile trade, which still remains visible in some of the outlook in the city. There are some repurposed mills, but also a lot of the terraced housing stems back from that area. Of course, interestingly, these kinds of housing present a lot of challenges for aging populations. The city in itself has around 13% of the population aged 60 and over, which is actually, compared to the rest of the country, a rather young city. But it is a city with very stark inequalities. So some of the most deprived neighborhoods of the country are located in Manchester, and the area has a lot of very poor health outcomes for older people, high levels of social exclusion, so many challenges which make a program around age friendliness even more important. So this is a little bit about the group I lead in Manchester. It's quite an unusual research group because it brings together not only academics from very different disciplines ranging from architecture to public health, sociology, social gerontology, but also importantly, people in our research group are located in community-based services, community organizations, and also people from the local and regional authority working around age friendliness are part of our research group. So we work in partnership to not only understand experiences of aging in urban environments, but also work collaboratively to find out where the issues are and what kind of things there exist to improve the experience of aging. So co-production, it was mentioned in the introduction, is a very central part of our work. We do research with older adults and with community organizations rather than on or about or for them. So a lot of our work is local in Manchester, but we also have a couple of programs of works that look internationally, doing comparative research. And one of the studies I lead is looking at 7 different cities across the world to look at how different age-friendly cities are supporting people to age well in the right place. And I will give some examples from that study across my presentation. So, in terms of the background, why a focus on aging well in the right place? First of all, we all know there is a very rich body of work from environmental gerontology, geographical gerontology, that shows the importance of home and neighborhoods and the increasing importance of home and neighborhood as we age. Some studies have found that people over the age of 70 spend around 80% of their time in the home and the local environment, making such spaces incredibly important to provide meaningful, safe spaces that can respond to people's changing needs across the life course. Secondly, we also know that aging in place is not a universal solution. Actually, on the contrary, when people live in homes and neighborhoods that are not adapted to people's needs, we know that this can really significantly undermine their well-being and independence, to the extent that people can feel like their home becomes a prison. Many places also lack the capacity to really fully support aging in place. So it is important to acknowledge that neighborhoods can not only provide this kind of sense of social insideness, to use the words of Graham Rawls, but neighborhoods can at the same time also be sites of exclusion. And this is especially the case in neighborhoods where high poverty or high community change arising from gentrification or displacement or inadequate housing arises. Fourthly, it's also important to acknowledge that the right place is not something that is fixed. It changes across the life course, it's dynamic, and it's also relational, to use Graham Cutchin's terminology. It's shaped by people's individual circumstances and also the way in which neighborhoods itself change around us. And finally, we must also ask, if we talk about placemaking in aging in place, whose needs are being prioritized? Some groups are systematically excluded or even erased from decisions about their environment. And I think erasure here, I use this using the terminology of Jessica Kelly-Moore, using it as a social critique of the ways in which certain groups simply are unseen in policy research or institutional practices. So she kind of uses the word of erasure to reflect the forms of social exclusion that are so embedded in the cultural institutions of our society that the absence of the groups is not even recognized. And one model that has aimed to respond to this erasure and also aims to support people to age well in the right place is the age-friendly city and community model. Initially developed in 2007 by the World Health Organization and based on a study in 33 cities across the world, asking older adults, caregivers, and service providers what it is that makes a city age-friendly. And this study kind of came up with these 8 domains of an age-friendly city and community, which kind of not only shows the importance of the physical environment in terms of transportation, housing, public spaces, but also really emphasizes the aspects in the environments that are considered the social environment, providing opportunities, for example, for civic and social participation, but also community and health services. And these are some of the kind of questions that some of the age-friendly work has engaged with. And an age-friendly city here is defined as an inclusive and accessible community environment that optimizes opportunities for health, participation, and security in order to enhance quality of life as people age. And building on this work in 2007, the World Health Organization then developed a global network of age-friendly cities and communities in 2010. And initially started with a handful of cities, Manchester, of course, being one of the pioneers. And now it's covering 1,700 cities and communities across over 70 countries in the world that have a commitment to this agenda of creating their environments more age-friendly. And as you can see, of course, there is a much larger coverage in the global north compared to the global south. But overall, there has been a really rapid expansion and take-up within this network. Although importantly, this has happened in the context of economic recession, a contraction of the welfare state in many countries, austerity policies, and an intensification of global competition and inequality, all of which raise major issues and challenges for countries and cities that have this commitment to creating age-friendly programs. And in these articles, together with my colleague Chris Phillipson, we have kind of looked at some of the tensions and challenges for age-friendly cities and communities to develop programs in the context of these kind of major, broader dynamics and challenges. In the past decade, attention to age-friendly cities and communities has also really very rapidly expanded in academic research. Not only in gerontology, but also in public health, sociology, geography, urban studies. And since 2015, there have been a number of special issues, books, articles, reviews that have been published on the topic. These are just a couple of books that I have presented here on the slide. And overall, they focus on 4 major areas. Firstly, conceptual development. Secondly, implementation. Thirdly, assessments, and fourthly, the challenges and opportunities linked to this age-friendly approach. And I will now look at what I would consider to be some of the contributions of this movement, or some of the progress that can be linked to some of those initiatives and the narratives that age-friendly approach has created. So first of all, I would say there has been a greater recognition in planning and design of the implications of population aging. And here in Manchester, this is an example of an article that was published in The Guardian just a couple of weeks ago on the back of our age-friendly summit, which we had in Manchester. And the City Council's age-friendly program really has allowed the city to create a space to focus on locality and neighborhood, and to use aging as an opportunity for bringing different agencies together and to co-create a more ambitious and forward-thinking way of thinking about the built environment. And this here is an example that really has enabled a collaboration across sectors to develop integrated neighborhood designs which connect housing, care, health provision and community infrastructure, and really try to position aging as a driver for more inclusive and sustainable development. At the home level, there have also been increasingly more attention from companies and organizations like Invisible Creations here that are trying to redefine accessibility with products like, for example, this wall planter grab rail that try to combine practical design with a more practical support with a more attractive design, moving beyond these kind of clinical, medicalized solutions, and by working with housing providers to create, and older adults to create more beautiful, inclusive design features that support aging in place without the stigma that is often attached to home adaptations. This one project, of course, I had to mention by Atiya Mahmoud, is a really powerful example, I think, that really shows how to create more inclusive neighborhoods. And we have taken a lot of inspiration from the approach that has been used in this project, because it's really a unique involvement of people with mobility, sensory, and cognitive disabilities, and older people who have worked as co-researchers in this project together with other stakeholders, not just to assess the walkability and the wheelability of their physical environment, but also to work and identify possible solutions or practical improvements through this kind of inclusive community-led process. But importantly, there's now also a greater recognition that age-friendly communities is not just about the physical and the built environment, it's also about investing in what we call social infrastructure. And we draw on the definition by sociologist Eric Kleinenberg here to define social infrastructure as the everyday spaces, the libraries, the parks, the cafes, the places of worship, all the kind of everyday spaces that support social connections in communities. And my colleague Sophie Yarker has written a book about creating spaces for an aging population, showing the incredible critical importance of these kinds of social infrastructures for supporting people to age well in place. And one example from our research in Akita in Japan, which has the highest proportion of older people in the country, is the Matagi Snipers. A really fascinating project that we had the opportunity to visit. And this is a bottom-up, older adults-led initiative, and was referred to by the people who run it as the country's first esports team, involved in gaming and bringing people, older adults together and this was in their words, to build a community that bridges generations. So many of the people who kind of set up this project talked about, it was about winning the respect from their grandchildren, connecting with different people in the community, but also supporting people's health and preventing dementia were mentioned as some of the reasons why this initiative was set up. And this initiative was backed up by the local government's age-friendly program, who provided them with a space to come together and invest in computers and training and support the socialization in this community. So a good example of investing in social infrastructure as part of age-friendly programs. Other examples coming from cities like Guadalajara and Manchester, who have run campaigns to challenge ageism by promoting more realistic and non-stereotypical images in the public domain of older people. In the UK, the Centre for Aging Better also developed an open access image library to support more positive and diverse portrayals of aging. And more people in media, working for newspapers, are using images from that open access library. But whilst the age-friendly movement has had a positive impact, there are also a lot of challenges remaining. And these challenges arise from some of the comparative work that we have done over the years in several cities that are committed to developing age-friendly programs. And firstly, we found that progress often depends on local, strong political support, leadership, and long, stable funding. And of course, when that leadership changes, which is often the case in local authorities, we really found that this creates challenges to maintain the momentum for age-friendly programs. Secondly, advancing the work during times of economic austerity, health crisis, rising inequalities has also very much proven difficult to make the case in an environment where often we see that some of the services that support aging populations are actually being cut as a result of public funding cuts. Thirdly, the model doesn't always translate very well across different cultural and political contexts. I think you've seen the map I showed at the start. There has been some research on how the age-friendly model can be translated in very precarious contexts in parts of the global south. The work of Aboderin, for example, she looked at the priorities of people aging in slum communities in Nairobi. And she found that really this kind of age-friendly approach, if it were to be useful in this context, would really need to be completely recreated bottom-up in order to make sense for communities that she worked with. And finally, measuring the impact maintains a real important challenge. Within that also, the participation of older people themselves is really important. And we found that often that participation still remains rather tokenistic. So we have argued that there is a need for much more radical, inclusive approaches that genuinely empower and center the voices of different groups of older adults. Another set of challenges for the age-friendly movement comes from the wider global and urban trends that shape who cities and communities are for or who they are governed by. And some of those challenges Chris Philipson and I reflected on in our book, Aging in Place in Urban Environments. And the first one arises from the privatization of cities. Where private actors increasingly control and dominate land, but also housing, public services, which really makes it difficult to develop age-friendly programs, which are often kind of based on the premise that we can intervene in the built environment. And this kind of really undermines the idea of what Guy Standing calls the urban commons, the shared spaces and the resources that support cities and communities and the collective life within cities. Secondly, climate change adds huge pressures for developing age-friendly communities. As Dawson in his book Extreme Cities mentions it, communities are becoming increasingly sites of collision between rising inequalities on the one hand and extreme weather events on the other, with the most marginalized groups often hit the hardest. And thirdly, we're also a planet on the move. Increasing conflict, rising inequalities, climate change are all driving mass migration, all of which raises really urgent questions about how age-friendly models can respond to the growing diversity but also displacement of many people in different stages of life. So a key argument of this presentation is that the concept of spatial justice helps us provide a useful framework for pushing forward the boundaries of what can be achieved with age-friendly cities and communities programs. And the concept of spatial justice kind of links together work around social justice on the one hand and space on the other. And it builds on geographers such as Edward Soja, Susan Feinstein, David Harvey, And it kind of reflects the idea that there needs to be a fairer distribution of resources, services, and opportunities across spaces. It reflects an intentional and a focused emphasis on the spatial aspects of justice and injustice. And it really invites us to think about how planning, policy making, power affect who benefits from these age-friendly programs and who is excluded. So spatial justice kind of really invites us to think more deliberately about planning and policy making to ensure that all residents, and particularly those most disadvantaged, can fully participate and benefit from community resources or from age-friendly programs. And this is especially, of course, relevant in the context of growing inequalities, the influence of private developers over public space, the impact of gentrification, and rising housing costs. It also invites us to think about how age-friendly programs might contribute to a more democratic experience of living in a community or in a city, because it kind of aims to foster what has been called rights to the city or rights to the community, suggesting that people of all ages, including older adults, should have a say in how their environments are being designed, governed, and used. So in short, a spatial justice perspective offers both a critical lens, but also a practical framework, we believe, for rethinking how we might build more inclusive, more equitable, age-friendly environments. And in the book, which is a collaborative endeavor between members of our research group, we invited people to really reflect on what spatial justice means in the context of their own work. And the first part really describes some of the background and kind of delves into the concept in itself. But the second part, and I will give some examples of the second part, really looks at some age-friendly interventions that have taken place in Manchester that aim to promote aspects of spatial justice. And the third part then tries to reimagine, this time spelled correctly, age-friendly communities. So we asked authors to engage with what we call 3 principles of spatial justice. The first one is equity and fairness, to ensure that the benefits derived from any programs or interventions do not just favor those who are already better off. Secondly, co-production, or the use of participatory bottom-up approaches involving those who are often excluded from decision-making processes in defining priority actions and domains for age-friendly change. And thirdly, an increased attention for diversity, which requires the recognition and the respect of different groups. So in terms of equity, the first principle, this raises really questions about who benefits from age-friendly initiatives, who is excluded, and how can these programs help us to tackle some of the really key challenges and systemic inequities arising from poverty, racism, and health disparities. And just to highlight one of the chapters that is worth looking at by Mark Hammond and my colleagues who are architects, and they kind of really examine the profession of architecture from a critical perspective and develop this concept of spatial ageism, which they define as excluding older people through design, which prioritizes younger, able-bodied users and often reinforces stereotypical views of aging. And in the chapter, they really hide a number of participatory approaches, often working in collaboration with their students in the university, architecture students. So participatory design approaches that involve centrally with older adults to create more inclusive and equitable solutions. Another project I've been involved in is highlighted in the book in chapter 6, and this really offers an example of how research can engage with questions of equity through the lens of aging in areas undergoing urban regeneration. And this project focuses on Collyhurst, a neighborhood in North Manchester that is shaped by decades of industrial decline, housing demolition, closure of local amenities, cuts to public services. And all of these changes have really led to entrenched social and economic inequalities for people remaining in the area. So just to give a few insights into the people living there, most older people live in social housing, many people live alone, a large proportion relies on pension credits. And in 2018, Collyhurst became part of what is called the Victoria North Regeneration Project, which was a really ambitious partnership between Manchester City Council on the one hand, and interestingly, the Far East Consortium, which is a private developer based in Hong Kong. The aim of this project is to build 15,000 new homes in the next 20 years. And initially, age-friendly principles were included in some of the regeneration vision plans, but there is huge uncertainty and many tensions in the area about whether and how these principles will be translated into practice on the ground. So our research aimed to address what I've called before the erasure of older adults from urban planning and discourses. And we asked how age-friendly principles can be meaningfully integrated into such urban regeneration processes so that the needs and aspirations of people who have been aging in place in this area are not overlooked. And to explore this, we conducted 22 interviews with older residents, but also we interviewed regeneration stakeholders and conducted a 6-month ethnography in this area. And we found that most older residents in this area actually found that regeneration was necessary. But many were very skeptical after decades of neglect and broken promises. And there was a very strong sense of consultation fatigue and a feeling that they were living in a forgotten place. And this really reflected the legacy of mistrust towards local authorities and developers and the broken promises that they have felt were made to them over the years. And this is a quote from Jeannie, a resident in her 80s, that really captures this sentiment perfectly. So we also found that actually strong community ties really remain in Collyhurst, despite years of neglect. And residents actually expressed a very clear desire to age in place, often in line with some of our other research in deprived neighborhoods. They very much valued the local identity, the community spirit, the connections in the area. But we also found that if urban regeneration was to support this kind of local identity and history, there is really a very strong need of mixed, affordable, and age-inclusive and appropriate housing, which is very questionable as to whether this will actually happen. Many people also kind of said the key priority should be to invest in spaces, the social infrastructure in the neighborhood, because lots of people felt that this was really disappearing and had been disappeared over the years. But more than that, we also found that there is a really strong need for sustained, open-ended collaboration with residents, and this really has to move beyond the kind of one-off consultations that has happened in the past. I think working towards having meaningful partnerships and working together with residents in a way that shapes the neighborhood's future is incredibly important. And this is visual minutes from a workshop that we had with some of the residents. But having those kinds of more meaningful partnerships beyond one-off consultations, again, has really proven especially important in the last couple of months. So one of my PhD students has started her fieldwork recently in the same area. So this builds on a long tradition of work that we have done in this area. And she has found that it's really difficult to engage some of the residents in her research, and some groups are actually actively boycotting some of those consultations organized by the City Council, showing really how fragile community trust has become. Again, an argument for much more sustained and inclusive engagement, that it will be really important to prevent this further disconnect from deepening further. A second key principle of spatial justice is the need to recognize and respect diversity. And this is really important because a lot of our research has found that the age-friendly model, especially in the early years, was taken up mainly by middle-class white communities, that, people and communities that have had some resources in place already to develop this kind of work. And in order to make sure that different groups are meaningfully included, and then we're thinking here about marginalized older adults, minoritized groups, ethnic minorities, migrants, refugees, LGBT plus older adults. All of these groups, I think, is really important to think about much more carefully in designing age-friendly programs to ensure and reflect a wider range of diversity. So some of the questions that we can ask using a diversity lens are: how can age-friendly initiatives better recognize and value and integrate those diverse identities, needs, experiences of aging populations? And how can we collaborate with grassroots organizations, racially and ethnically minoritized groups, LGBTQ+ communities, women's organizations, faith-based groups, disability rights campaigns, dementia-friendly initiatives, to recognize and amplify their existing contributions to age-friendly efforts, even if they are not labeled as such, or even if they are not formally part of age-friendly programs. And this report is based on a piece of research that we've done working with different faith spaces in Manchester. So we did research with older adults visiting temples, mosques, churches, Pentecostal churches, and synagogues. And we found that often these spaces were kind of vital, trusted forms of social infrastructure in the communities, where those faith spaces had these kind of ties with older migrants or people experiencing financial hardships. And also we found that a lot of these spaces and the activities that they provided were very important in supporting people when they were facing difficult life transitions. But interestingly, such spaces are actually rarely recognized in formal age-friendly programs or work. So part of this report was really about also inviting the City Council and age-friendly programs to think really about how we could link up with faith spaces who do clearly a lot of age-friendly work that we can learn from and work with, to make sure that the work kind of reaches out to underrepresented groups and strengthens inclusion of community aging efforts. Other examples are the Pride in Aging initiatives. And this here on the left-hand side was based on a participatory action project which we have been involved in, called the Derek Jarman Pocket Park in Manchester. Again, a bottom-up project led by older LGBTQ+ adults who came together around the finding that many were experiencing isolation and discrimination linked to their sexual orientation or gender identity. And they found that they wanted to have a space, a safe green space where they could do gardening in the city center, and designed this pocket park in 2022, which really kind of created a sense of ownership for the people involved. But also importantly, it was about being seen, about having a safe space in the city, and it was way more than just about gardening. It was about having a space where people could feel they belong and be accepted for who they are in the city centre. And more recently, the city of Manchester also approved the development of the UK's first majority LGBTQ+ social housing with extra care on site. And we're very excited because our research group secured a grant to work with the co-production group of older adults that has been involved from the very beginning in trying to work with the council and the developers and architects to think about how that kind of housing scheme might look like. So hopefully if I come back in the future, I'll be able to share some of the results from that project. Another chapter in the book focuses on the experiences of older refugees and asylum seekers, and this work draws on one of my very brilliant PhD students, Tess Hartland, and her PhD looked at the experiences of precarity in everyday life among older refugees and asylum seekers. And she conducted not only 26 life story interviews about people's experiences of everyday life, but also co-produced together with her participants this comic book called Echoes of Displacement, which tells the collective story, co-produced with the participants, about growing older and the challenges around seeking sanctuary in Manchester. The comic book, but her wider research really shows experiences of precarity and the very many challenges arising from living in a hostile policy context, but also really the huge struggles and challenges around navigating the housing system, limited access to services, and how all this produces both spatial and social exclusion. But it also shows the resilience and the community networks and the support that her participants kind of built, and the importance of charity organizations and community organizations providing support for these groups. And from a spatial justice perspective, I think here, this kind of research really challenges the age-friendly policies to better respond to and also understand these experiences by addressing some of the very exclusionary practices, but also contributing to upholding some of the rights to safety, connection, and recognition of older adults seeking sanctuary. The final principle is co-production. And here the question is, how can age-friendly initiatives not only secure older adults' right to a share of urban space, but also how can they support people's participation in decision-making about this space, and how can they support people's right to shape the strategies for planning? And this is a report here focusing on community interventions to promote aging in place. Again, a participatory action research project which we have been involved in. And here really the idea was to test the village model, originally developed in the United States, which is a grassroots membership-based approach developed to support people to aging in place, where older adults can access support volunteered or through paid services for things like transport or community activities or home maintenance. So an idea, a village model, is really to support people to age in place. But what we wanted to do in this project is to test a model that has been developed in particular kinds of communities, to test this model in some of the most deprived neighborhoods in Manchester. And this report really shows how starting off with the village model became something quite different in the context of deprived neighborhoods. But it does also show some of the challenges of trying to bottom-up developed this kind of model, but it also shows the kind of importance of collaborative initiatives and working together with different grassroots organizations in those neighborhoods. I do have some copies, not a lot, but of some of the reports that I mentioned, but they are also all available open access. I can also give an example of some work that I have been involved in when I first came to Manchester. And this was work that was built on a partnership with older adults who were trained as co-researchers in their neighborhoods to identify those issues that could become more age-friendly and co-develop responses to some of the findings based on the research. And in this project, we trained 18 older residents across 3 deprived neighborhoods, and they became the co-researchers and were involved in all stages of the research, from co-designing the research objectives to co-producing some of the research materials. And then they also conducted interviews with people living in the area. And they decided they really wanted to focus on those residents who would usually not be involved in research projects like this. So they went out and interviewed some of the more isolated groups or people living in the neighborhood about their needs to age well in place. And the co-researchers interviewed 68 older adults, and together with local community organizations, the co-researchers also kind of came together to not just to analyze the data, but also to try and find and co-create solutions or actions that could respond to some of the issues that were identified in the study. And we found that many of the co-researchers we worked with, this is a project that was done in 2016, most of the co-researchers are still involved in some of our research projects and really have become advocates of this age-friendly agenda. And this here is a report that is co-written with the co-researchers who wanted to be involved in co-writing this report about their reflections of what it means to be involved as a co-researcher in such a project. But we have also written some academic papers looking at this kind of methodology a bit more critically, because it is a methodology that has a lot of opportunities but also a lot of challenges linked to it. One finding from the research that was acted upon was the local bus service, which was cut due to funding pressures a year prior to the research. And this was really identified in all the interviews as one of the most important problems, not just for older adults, but actually for lots of different groups living in the neighborhood, because it was the bus service that was linked to the hospital, it was the bus service that was linked to visiting, specific places in the city, it was the bus service that allowed them to visit family and friends. And this disappeared, and for many older adults, the distance to walk to another nearby bus stop had become way too far. And because this was such an important finding in the project, a lot of the older co-researchers came together and really played a role in campaigning to get this bus back, which was a huge challenge because at that time, there were 20 different bus companies in Manchester, all privatized, so very difficult to navigate, and even the local authorities don't really have much influence over these private companies running the bus services. We now, since about 1 year, I have to say, our bus network in Manchester is public again, so that has been a major improvement. But as a result of this project, what happened is that because of the relentless campaigning of the co-researchers in collaboration with the community organizations and the local authorities who had supported our research, they managed to get this bus back. And eventually, this used to be the 85A bus, and then it was dubbed. Everybody was referring to it as the 85 age-friendly bus. So, in conclusion, how do we reimagine age-friendly work? Spelled correctly again. Firstly, age-friendly work must prioritize spatial justice. And I hope I made a case for this, that it can help to ask critical questions about our work, especially about how we can make our work contribute to tackling inequities by redistributing resources and centering the voices of those who have been the most marginalized. Secondly, it also must embrace diversity. So recognizing the unique identities and needs of different aging populations, whilst also at the same time creating social infrastructure or shared spaces that are aimed at building solidarity between and across age groups. And thirdly, age-friendly work also must commit to genuine co-production. Working with older adults and grassroots organizations is really important to co-create more inclusive and equitable communities. And finally, it really must challenge the status quo. Age-friendly work should not just simply adapt the world to the world as it is, but it should really see and use aging as an opportunity to build more just and also more sustainable communities through collective action and innovation. And I want to end with this final slide where I introduced the idea of moving beyond seeing aging as an individual problem that needs solutions to try and think more about collective forms of organization that support spatial justice in later life. And drawing on Leslie Kern's work, who wrote a book, which I really recommend, Gentrification is Inevitable and Other Lies. And she really kind of asks a very valid question, I think. How can we create or repurpose spaces in cities, rural areas, or anything in between in ways that open up a wide range of possibilities for sustaining and practicing the kinds of relationships that will support us across the life course? And I think this is a really interesting question to think about, because it also kind of invites us to reframe aging as a shared and a collective concern, which requires a socially engaged but also collaborative approaches to both community development but also research. And I hope together we can continue to make great progress in thinking about aging as a collective challenge, which calls for shared spaces, shared responsibilities, and shared futures. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Tine, for that thought-provoking presentation on spatial justice applied to age-friendly communities, and sharing your tremendous and cutting-edge research. We have a few minutes for some questions, and I have a microphone here, so if anyone wants to raise their hand, I'll run over with the microphone and you can ask Tine a question.
Thank you so much, Tine. That was a wonderful presentation. I think you definitely made a compelling case for the spatial justice framework, and lots of good examples here. What I'm thinking, and my question is that in the spatial justice framework, you talk about diversity, equity, and co-production. And I'm thinking that equity and diversity are perhaps more substantively oriented principles, whereas co-production is a process-oriented principle. And in my mind, that is a critically important principle, the co-production, because that's how it can be sustained. You talk about sustainability over time, not a one-off thing. And in terms of sustainability, you mentioned different things about different community organizations and so on, local government authorities, places of worship, and so on. So my question is, what is happening from your experience in Manchester and other cities regarding that sustainability issue. So to what extent you see initiatives being taken to have, let's say, older adult council with the city government or community organizations talking about these issues, or community centers, for example, talking about what are the challenging issues that seniors are facing right now. So the part of it is about that seniors need to have a voice, or supported by the context, to share their experiences, which we currently don't have in most places, right? So I'm just curious, what have you seen, and what are your thoughts about how can we implement that as a sustainable method? Thanks.
Thank you so much. That's a great question. And you're actually kind of setting us up to write the next paper that we're trying to do, looking at the comparative study. So we have looked at how 7 age-friendly cities, so Quebec in Canada, Brussels in Belgium, Oslo in Norway, Manchester, Brno in the Czech Republic, Akita in Japan, and Bilbao in Spain, all of which have been dedicated age-friendly cities. We have looked at how they are trying to make sure that the voices of older people are central in the development of age-friendly programs, and we found that there is huge variation across the cities about how cities are thinking about it and also how they are doing it. And it's kind of, I would say, there is a continuum. Some cities kind of, in the way they facilitate participation, there is not so much attention to specific groups within the older population. And as a result, we find that the people who do participate in developing these programs are often those people who are already active and who are already those people who are very engaged in all these other platforms where they can let their voice be heard. So these are the kind of more, we call it, I think, generalistic approaches of participation, where there is participation for older adults, but without specific initiatives to really ensure that specific subgroups are involved, and especially those people who are often underrepresented. But then there are also cities that really have specific initiatives in place to make sure that people with lived experiences of inequality, whether that's because of disability or because people living in very low-income neighborhoods, or because of shared experiences of racism or migration, and those cities have really kind of more specific mechanisms in place to make sure that those groups' voices are heard. Obviously, I mean, I'm biased, but Manchester is quite a good example because there has been not only an older people's forum that is a combination of older residents from across the region, and this is kind of the age-friendly program, and the city council works with them, and they are kind of their almost like employers in the sense that they have been taken accountable through that kind of forum. But within that forum, there are also specific groups of older adults with specific lived experiences of inequality. So there is really much more kind of a focused effort in making sure that LGBT older people are represented, people with living in low-income neighborhoods, and all these kind of subgroups of people who are often not very much heard. So it's a really good question, and it's very, very diverse, from a very top-down model led by the local authorities to models that kind of stimulate grassroots involvement, but still have a strong kind of program in place. And I think Manchester is that kind of in between. It's about stimulating grassroots involvement, but the program itself is very much led by the city council. And then there are models that are much more focused on really the kind of community-based, bottom-up involvement. But we haven't really found a lot of examples of the last kind of category. But hopefully we will be able to share some findings in a paper which is under review at the moment.
Thank you very much for a really great presentation, Tina. My name is Michelle. I work with a collective impact initiative called the Hey Neighbor Collective. And I had the wonderful pleasure of actually meeting with a whole bunch of folks from the Greater Manchester Aging Hub a few years ago in Manchester. And it is a really incredible model that's quite well thought out, and there's a really strong commitment, like you were just talking about, to really making sure there's accountability from various communities and diverse communities. My question is actually super specific in your presentation. So Hey Neighbors is really about building more age-friendly, socially connected, neighborly, resilient, multi-unit housing specifically. So looking at how we can reduce loneliness and isolation, build up resilience in apartments, condos, whatnot. So we bring together, almost in a slightly similar way to the Aging Hub, we have municipal partners, regional government partners, health authorities, market and non-market landlords, lots of community-based nonprofits who do programming in partnership with housing organizations. My question was about the LGBTQ housing example you shared. You talked about housing with extra care. I'm wondering if you can describe for us what housing with extra care means, because it's kind of a category of housing in the UK, and I think it's getting at some of what we're trying to make happen here in Canada, which is bringing in different kinds of supports into existing housing, and not just only for older adults and not just to address aging in place, but for any and all age groups.
Thank you, and that initiative sounds really fascinating. I'm very keen to hear more about it and learn from it. In terms of this specific project, the LGBTQ plus housing project, the aim is to have affordable housing. I think they are planning to build around 100 apartments, and the idea is to have care and health provision on site available, and that's what the kind of term with extra care involves. I don't think they have a very specific idea yet about how that is going to take place in practice, and that's why the next 2 years, so the project has just had approval, so they still have to start building, but they, in the next 2 years now, together with this co-production group of all the residents who would like to move into this scheme, they are aiming to kind of co-produce what that might look like on site. So I can't really say at the moment how it will look like, but the idea is really for it to be embedded in a community. So they are looking to make sure that there are connections with the existing neighborhoods, and they are working with different organizations in the neighborhood who are also involved in kind of envisaging this project. But the care aspect it will be an important one in terms of providing care on site within the housing scheme.
Great, thank you, Tina. And on behalf of everyone here, please join me in thanking Tina for the wonderful presentation today.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay, I have a few household matters. After this afternoon's sessions, we have a reception, and that reception is at 5 p.m. until 6:30 p.m. out at the Tech Gallery. That's the beautiful Vista room we have just behind this seagull. And I encourage everyone to go there. We're going to have refreshments and nibbles there, so you can have something to eat and drink. Afterwards, we have a public lecture. Anthony Cooperschmidt is going to be presenting, and that'll be at 6:30 to 7:30. So please look at your program and see where that is. We encourage everyone to go to that. That's a free public lecture as well, so there may be other individuals who come. So on that note, please take 15 minutes. We'll see you back.